did this art exhibition in here that evokes the same geometry that Buckminster Fuller used within this geodesic array of triangles that come together to form pentagons and hexagons, and those are kind of the elemental building blocks of nature. You see those shapes and forms repeated over and over again on a subatomic level and a galactic level. And one interesting fact of people who've set about to study and observe these structural patterns, they've defined that field as kind of a sacred geometry, that the smallest component of physical creation is always identical to the largest. So that idea is called self-similarity. So if you go away from here with curiosity, look up self-similarity. It's very interesting. It's kind of the foundation of fractal math and Mandelbrot sets. All of those terms are worth looking into if you're interested in it at all. So I infused like this artwork with little pieces of self-similarity just to demonstrate it, to lead people into possibly having discussions about this stuff. Like the smallest component is identical to the largest. So, like in the case of these triangles, one comes together to make four, and then those four at this size come together to make one at this size, and that's how natural creation works. And this kind of evokes it just to create a little dialogue. And the fact that I used reclaimed materials and old pieces of vintage advertising signage is another intention to speak to the sustainability of Bucky's legacy and the sustainability of this Center for Spirituality and Sustainability. The advertising messages that were contained in here encourage people to buy more than they need and consume more than they need, and that's the magic that's being done, and that's the mythos that's being fed to our current population. The advertising message says, you ain't good enough. You need what we have to make you feel good. We're what stands between you and happiness. You need the goods that we're offering. They were selling consumerism. And they're operating in a tradition of this concept of myth-making, where you use the same tactics that were used in mythology to bring across these ideas that nature and the seasonal cycles are what support us. That was the function of ancient mythology, was to illuminate and direct people's thought and attention towards the passing of the seasons and how nature supports us. They use all the same little pieces of entertainment, symbols, songs, mantras repeated over and over again. They changed the names of all of that into logos, jingles, slogans, mascots, but that's how the human mind works. And advertising agencies understand it. I worked in advertising for 15 years, so I know that it's not like this conspiracy theory of these evil people plotting the destruction of the planet, but it's about pushing your buttons. Further evidence of that is Sigmund Freud. He's one of the foundational fathers of psychology. He's the first to put forth this idea of this collective subconscious, and that people are guided individually by personal subconscious urges. Well, his nephew is a guy named Edward Bernays. He was able to read Sigmund's papers before they were published. He saw the insights of that, and he realized how powerful that information was, and he moved to New York and opened what was to become the first advertising agency. So he used that information about psychology to plot ways for corporations to influence people's thoughts by pushing their subconscious buttons. That's just the history of it. That's not adulterated in any way. Edward Bernays is one of his first clients that he proved how successful this was a tobacco company said, okay, prove that your methods are effective. We want women to start smoking because at that time they didn't smoke. Something else that was going on at that time was the suffrage movement, which was, they were protesting for women's rights and things. So Edward Bernays looked at the cultural landscape, he looked at the cultural subconscious, and he said, these are the things that are going on, these are the things that are at the top of everybody's mind. So he crafted this mythos that Women can assert their independence and their freedom by bucking the social mores and smoking. Prove how independent you are as a woman and smoke. And so he started giving cigarettes out to the women who were protesting in the suffrage movement, and it worked. It became this form of identity that women were able to, show their independence and smoke and go against the grain. Well, the rest is history. Women continuously become the largest increasing smoking population in the whole society and culture. And Virginia Slims still, to this day, their slogan is, "You've come a long way, baby." Like, you've earned the right to kill yourself. So, like the men do, So, it's business. It's just about business. But, the cumulative effect of all that business is degradation of our environment, degradation of our health, degradation of our culture. So that kind of sums up the point of cutting up advertising messages and reforming into patterns that, give reverence and attention back to nature, which is the real thing that sustains and supports us. So, that was how advertising, in one little example, co-opted this idea of pushing your subconscious buttons and pushing the cultural subconscious buttons. Additionally, they're working in a tradition which is, in effect, magic. Today's society, you say something's magic, that people automatically think that is a trick, that you played a trick on them, that it's not true, it's false, it's a sleight of hand. Well, if you look up what magic is or magical thinking, it actually is that your thoughts and ideas that you have, you think that they will influence the physical world somehow. So that's like a psychological problem. That's if you suffer from magical thinking, you think that your thoughts and ideas affect the material world. Well, I suffer from that psychological condition. I think that thoughts and ideas are primary to the physical world. And they come first, and the physical world comes second. And anybody who prays also, I think, is probably suffering from magical thinking, even if they're trying to channel the Creator through their thoughts and intentions. They think that their hopes and their wishes and dreams, are going to shape the outcome. Well, there's also a strong connection with this idea of using this series of letters or, to create words, that you take letters, these symbols that stand in the place of something else, and you spell with them, and that's an overlap right there of the etymology of those words, that when to cast a spell is to spell. When language was new, in the Sumerian and Egyptian, back in the Mideast and the Semitic, I think about 7,000 years ago, when they first came up with the notion of having a symbol stand in the place of something actual, they really thought that was magic. Like, I can show, you these series of symbols, and then if you have a cultural understanding of what those are, the thought that I want you to have will come into your head. And we take it all for granted now. That's just the way the world works or whatever. But, within the long history of this planet, this is a very short time. This is really new. We don't even fully, I think, have a grasp of what we're working with when we use these letters and, put them together in a sequence to try to manipulate the entire population, especially when we're trying to guide their thought and attention towards consumerism messages, and try to prey upon their insecurities. I think that's the seed of a lot of the problems that we're faced with now, with this unsustainable culture that you see we have. Like, I don't think there's a public institution that's not breaking down, economically or, socially, educational systems, political systems. They all seem to be all simultaneously in turmoil. I think it's because we've turned our back away from the real and gotten lost in this message of this man-made fake culture that's standing between us and what the Creator gave us, and saying, we'll be like your surrogate Mother Nature. We have everything that you need. We are what sustains you. And that message was brought through the use of this ancient form of word magic. Now, you know, if you still are not quite sure about this whole idea that, you know, spelling is magic, or words are magic, or, you know, advertising is using magic, there's another group of people that used all this same knowledge and wisdom. And that was in the late 70s in New York. The city was in complete crisis. You know, they thought the city was going to just implode and go bankrupt at that time. It was totally up for grabs. You know, project housing was out of control, crime was out of control. They had the school system budgets were broke. They were cutting programs. There was no art program, no music program. Drugs were rampant, violence was rampant, and, you know, so you had this youth culture at that time that didn't have, you know, art and music programs in their school system, and society was breaking down all around them, got together, and the person, I'll have to backtrack here a little bit. I helped someone who was involved with that foundational culture that emerged out of New York at that time design a house in a sustainable manner. His name was Doze Green. And my understanding of that culture was only through what I had seen delivered through the media, you know. This culture I'm referring to is, you know, mostly known as like a hip-hop culture. It contains graffiti art, breakdancing, rap music, DJing, that whole culture that, you know, most of you guys, it was already in place when you were born. But that emerged like when I was probably around 5th grade or so. And, you know, radio stations didn't even play rap music. Even the black stations, like Magic 108 out of St. Louis, only played rap after midnight. During the day, it was all Luther Vandross and like slow jam type music. But so, you know, you'd have to stay up till midnight and to even hear any kind of rap music that was coming out of New York City. Well, you know, through talking with Doze, he told me about this guy named Ramsey, who was older than him, who turned him on to this whole idea of graffiti art writing. And Ramsey named himself that when he was about 19, 18 years old, and the name is not even a name, it's a mathematical equation. And that, you know, came to him as an idea that, you know, he is a result of geometry and math, and that he is an action, he is a probability, he is not, you know, Buckminster Fuller would actually even agree with Ramsey. Buckminster Fuller, you know, referred to God and even himself, you know, I don't seem to be a thing, you know, I am a verb, or God is a verb. You know, God is not an object, God is an action, or I am an action. I am defined by the result of my actions. This is the same thing what Ramsey is trying to say. And he created this whole mythology around this idea that he was able to remember past lives, which he worked as a guy who was responsible in an abbey where monks worked, illuminating ancient manuscripts. And if you've ever seen those, like the first letter of, you know, each chapter, there's like a big drop cap, and it's this really scrolly, complex shape of a letter that combines with a saint, maybe in like some organic shapes, and it's really awesome. And they gold leaf it, illuminated manuscripts. He said that he could remember working on those in a past life, and that he got together the graffiti artists at that time who were just kind of tagging and said, you know, they were doing bubble letters, block letters, just basic stuff like that. He said, if you infuse your work with what he called wild style, which further like obscures the letter and patterns it off of these kind of sacred geometric forms that give reference to the creator and nature, and then project your name out into the subway system, you know, it travels around, you will cast a spell. You will gain name fame for yourself. And he was also, he not only did that, but he was also an MC. You know, he was one of the first guys to, you know, the graffiti culture came first. And then after that, you know, you started having, at that time, like block parties and stuff with like DJ Cool Herc, the first guys who when they would, you know, DJ a party, you put on a James Brown record or something like that, they would observe that, you know, everybody really gets up out of their seat during this section of the song. Well, wouldn't it be great if I took that section of the song and then I put it back to it again and let it come through it, and then I put it back to it again and let it come through it. So you just emphasize the break beat of the drum break. Like there's a section in there where there's a drum break where everybody dances. So, you know, that was the advent of this whole idea of DJing, where you bring it back and let the drum break go in a loop. So then, you know, Rammellzee was in on that whole culture. He started, you know, talking over the top of that in this kind of like a gibberish. It sounded like, you know, this, what slowly kind of evolved into this whole idea of emceeing, and then formed this, you know, you see, you know, kids who would come out, dance during the breakbeat, and they were all, you know, little graffiti artists and taggers, and this whole culture emerged out of this condition of poverty. Complete culture, dance, art, music, philosophy, the whole thing, whether you like it or not, or whether you think it was to the degradation of, you know, the global culture or not, the spell that was planted by the memory of Rammellzee at that time changed and affected the entire global culture. You know, Japan, through the whole shop. Doze Green, the guy that I helped design a house for, he was a breakdancer first. He was part of the Rocksteady crew, as the original breakdancing crew. And he said that the poses that they would do during breakdancing were actually mimicking the letter forms that they were doing in the graffiti. So, you know, these like poses and all these different things that you see, you know, with the breakdancing, not breakdancing. You probably couldn't tell, but, you know, those are letter form, you know, poses that they were doing during this breakbeat, you know, DJ set with a guy like Rammellzee, you know, channeling, practically like speaking in tongues over the top of it, and you know, to like, kind of like, just, this is a tradition that humanity has done since the dawn of time. You know, they were using a DJ set. It was all different in the 70s, but it was a shamanic practice. It was a repeated drum beat that kind of builds up into almost like a trance-like state with this kind of like mantra-like talking over the top of it that then kind of further elevates you into this kind of transcendent state. And then there's this, you know, ceremonial dancing that evokes the art form, that evokes the sacred geometry that is the same geometry that exists within this geodesic dome, that, you know, culture spent centuries figuring out based off of sun angles and movement of stars, and, you know, it's all tied together into one thing. And, you know, it was very enlightening for me to see all these connections, because I wasn't even really aware of the depth of hip-hop, or that hip-hop culture. But you can't understate it, because I think the only other time, you know, American culture produced that would have been like in the jazz era, when there was, you know, a whole kind of cultural movement came forward. But, you know, that's proof and evidence of it, that if you operate within that whole kind of intention, word magic and all of that, you know, the power isn't necessarily in the objects or the things, but the power is in the belief or the intention of the person doing it. And then that power gets further amped up if the thing that you're doing is in alignment with what the creator set forward. Just like the dome, it's efficient because it operates within the material structure that was laid down in the very beginning. It's really interesting too, like if you look at the indigenous people mythos of America, especially like in the Southwest, you know, a lot of them said that the creator of the material world was Grandmother Spider, and she wove this web out upon which the material creation was able to collect like dewdrops. So that's where, in their mythos, this pattern, these shapes, this repetition comes from. Now, they did not believe that an arachnid created the world. That is a symbol, just like all this other stuff is symbols, you know, to lead your belief system into the place that just says there is an underlying structure, there is an underlying pattern to this material creation. And, you know, Buckminster Fuller, in his, you know, writings, and I would encourage you to read them, especially the one about this building. It's fascinating what his intention was for it. He speaks about this lattice of structure that pervades all things that is beyond our, you know, five senses to actually physically perceive, that causes these shapes to reoccur on all levels of creation. So he told the same story with science and mathematics that these native people told with this mythos. And, you know, before I gave this, today's my birthday too, by the way, so you leave gifts at the door. But this is a gift, actually, to get to talk to you guys, so I, you know, appreciate you being here. Last night I was thinking about this, and, you know, Ramsey passed away, and I was thinking, man, I don't feel like I am worthy of even speaking his name or talking about his legacy without having directly spoken to him, and, you know, or someone who's really close to him who can validate all these stories. Well, you know, I'm on Instagram, and I woke up, I looked, you know, alarm goes off, I looked at the phone. This guy named Dr. Z had liked a few pictures of this artwork. I'm like, you know, who's Dr. Z? So I'm looking at Dr. Z. Dr. Z has several pictures of artwork that look like the Ramesses. So this morning, just this morning, about 8 o'clock, I said, Ramesses, question mark? He hit me back about an hour later, said, no, those are mine. I was Ramesses' apprentice for a year. So that was kind of wild. So I said, do you have time to talk? I'm giving a talk in about 3 hours. I would love to get firsthand account that the things that I'm saying about Ramesses' legacy is actually accurate. He said, sure, what do you want to know? So he gives me a number. He's in South Africa. And I said, is it true that Ramesses had gotten this information, you know, that he infused within this whole graffiti art culture through memory of past lives? And he said, yeah. I mean, he was definitely getting it from somewhere else that was not himself. He was, he said, I would be sitting there talking with him about these concepts, and all this information would stream out really fast, similar to like the way he did when he was emceeing, just come out. And then he would like laugh or be amused by what he had just said, and as if like he was as surprised as you were to hear it. It wasn't his. It was coming, you know, it was coming through him. So I think the idea of me truly wishing, I wish I could speak with someone who had direct contact with Ramesses, and overnight that person came through. You know, I don't necessarily really know how that works, but I have a hunch, and I'll just, you know, indulge me for a couple more minutes. Through analyzing geometry and everything, and this idea that the smallest component of creation is identical to the largest, you know, led me to this conclusion, like, when you look at molecules, you got a nucleus surrounded by subatomic particles, they orbit around it, and they're drawn in by that center nucleus. You look at our solar system, it has a center nucleus, it's a sun, surrounded by particles that orbit around it, that are drawn and held together. It's the same structure, the subatomic galactic. Scientists have looked at the amount of space, you know, the concept of space, like outer space, the space between heavenly bodies in our solar system is a smaller, it's more dense, and this is hard to kind of get your head around. That space, relative to the size of those heavenly bodies, is smaller, meaning the amount of space within us on a molecular level. Relative to the size of the nucleus and the particles that go around it, that space is greater. So, if that's, I mean, that's science, that's physics. We have a retired physics professor. I don't know if they talked about that at all, but So, looking at that, going down within what we perceive to be the physical world is actually more open. There's more openness within molecular or subatomic or physical structure than there is within this perceived emptiness around us. So there is a density that we are contained within, and we are, and physical objects are, the openings or the pockets or the space. Like, just as a metaphor, if the universe is a sponge, we are the holes or the openings inside the sponge. So, and there's unity there to it. So it would be for us to say, I'm different than you, and Dr. Z is in South Africa, and he's separate from me, and we're separated by an ocean and all this stuff, would be like two holes inside the sponge saying, we're totally separate. We don't have anything to do with each other. Well, it's one thing. So, if thoughts and thought intention and stuff like that have an actual, tangible, physical quality, it's shared by all of us. That's what advertising works on. It sends out that message that works on the cultural subconscious that guides us in a direction. So it is my hope with this artwork and with this talking and these shows and bringing light to Buckminster Fuller's legacy and everyone else that I mentioned, geometers and Ramelsey and all of these guys, that we can take back the power of all of that communication. And telecommunications right now, just like the example I cited with Instagram, that's the tool. That's that global network that we have right now that literally actually manifests this idea where if I have an idea, I can put it out into the world, and that infrastructure fulfills that. People can see it. People can see it simultaneously. That's why we record this and put it out there. But if awareness grows great enough that this power will be taken out of the hands of corporations that are trying to make us make bad choices with it, put it back into our hands, and just be more aware and more conscious of these things that we normally take for granted. And that's what I got for today. Anybody got any questions? Yes?
Two quick questions. One is, it sounds like you're saying that advertising is a lot of it's subliminal thought projection. And I know on a TV show, Marcus will do that.
Oh, yeah.
So it said that was sort of subliminal, like, make us be well.
Oh, wow.
And the other thing is, you mentioned that you don't feel that thought has anything to do with outward manifestation. I know that physicists are saying that literally matter doesn't exist. So
right.
So
no, I didn't mean to say that the thought. I meant to say that the thoughts are primary. Matter is secondary. The thought comes first. Quantum mechanics and string theory. There's that thing called the observer effect, where subatomic particles behave differently under observation than they do when they're not under observation. So there is, again, and you can also separate subatomic particles from each other, put them on other sides of the globe, and they still respond and vibrate as if they're still connected. So location has no importance. So, I wouldn't go so far as to say like, Matrix movie is an accurate depiction, because there's a lot of people that take this information and be like, oh yeah, we're living in a holographic computer simulation, because all this reality with this, repeated ones and zeros type structure, repeated form throughout, it seems to respond to our observation, and we're controlled, the thought intention controls it, so therefore it behaves like a computer. It must be some computer simulation that God put down for us to work within. Well, I mean, that is exactly what people have done throughout all history. Whatever the current cultural thing is that we've innovated that we're so proud of, you project that on the natural creation. I mean, they have it backwards. The computer technology is an imitation of natural and real reality. That's why you can draw that correlation. Reality is not a computer simulation, but innovation that works well, like a geodesic dome, imitates nature. And technology imitates our, I think there's the same number of neural connections within our brain relatively as there are internet connections globally. So it's just a continuous outward manifestation of our internal gifts, and that's how it seems to work. What was the other question?
About subliminal thought projection.
Oh, the subliminal part of it? I don't even think it's subliminal. I mean, I know that sometimes they throw a quick frame in a movie that you can't really sense. It's subliminal in a sense, I guess, if we've evolved in this natural environment that nurtured and sustained us so that these patterns of nature we've associated with being good, if they use those, you use those in architecture, you use those in art, you use those in advertising and construct symbol systems, then you view that and then you'll automatically think that's good based on its appearance. This aesthetics alone will open you up to what it's saying because it imitates the true source and the sustaining source of nature. And then that part is a little bit of a trick in getting your attention over there and away from where it should be, because that helps to create that 1% and concentrate wealth by concentrating on collective attention, everybody together. All right.
I have believed for many years that word, anything comes out of your mouth.
Yeah.
You can't watch what you say because you create which I guess is an extension of your thought.
Right.
But,
that's the symbol.
I can try to tell my kids before you say something bad, think about it, because you're going to create it.
Right.
It comes out of your mouth if you say it.
Yeah.
And it will reach people's ears, and there's no way
Right.
to take it back. It goes on forever
Yeah.
and ever and ever.
I think it's real. I mean, you're physically vibrating a portion of your body that's physically vibrating a portion of my body. Your vocal cords are vibrating, my eardrum. So that's a direct, literal, physical effect, on me. I mean, even the Bible says in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word moved over the surface and made manifest all of physical creation. Well, they're just saying that if there's a creative will, that it used, the harmonics or vibrational frequency to, come into this, start to take the chaos and create the organizational pattern that evolved forward.
I was raised Catholic and was all the way into high school, but before the Second Ecumenical Council, which changed a lot of things.
Yeah.
Especially the Mass.
Right.
But
Used to be
when I was
Latin.
a kid,
Yeah.
the Mass, the last thing that happened in it was the last gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Where they got to it was the last gospel. But it was one of the gospels of John.
Yeah, he was a visionary.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh, which
Right.
is how God
Yes.
supposedly
Yes.
created his creation.
I think it's accurate. I think string theory is bearing it out to be true because they say that, they collide subatomic particles into each other to get smaller and smaller and smaller particles. Like they'll break these ones into small particles, they'll collide those particles. And then eventually they get down to the point where the particle collides, disappears for an instant, whoop, comes back, and it didn't lose any mass. So then they have to be like, okay, well there's something beyond the physical world that says there shall be a little particle at this point. And then that's where the string theory, this vibrating, the vibratory, that's what, vibrating, this tonal force exists that coalesces matter at that location. So if, these ancient mythoses are stories that leads us to the same conclusion, because they did it for thousands of years, generations after generation, observing natural creation. Science, you don't have, multiple lifetimes to study astrology, astronomy, geometry. You have to be told that story through the Bible, a parable that will lead you to that insight so that you can have it, come on over your head like, the world gets, that thoughts and ideas, words, symbols, vibrational frequency that comes from them shapes the world like God created it.
So what do you do about it?
Give reverence to natural creation. That's the only thing, you know, and hope to align with it, and use art and messages and symbols and talking to give, you know, guide people's attention back to source instead of into the fake, you know, lure of this culture that, you know, like you were here for that mythology talk, that whole idea that, you know, taking the idea of evolution or social Darwinism and saying, you know, it's survival of the fittest, you know, using that, all of this mythos and all of this word magic to craft a story that tells people that they have to, we all have to compete with each other, and that there's not enough to go around, and that the lion, you know, he is the king, and, you know, he's king of the jungle, and he is entitled by God and nature to prey upon the larger population in the herd and, you know, take from them, so that we accept that reality with a 1%, looking at the larger population and preying upon them and taking that. That's the way God intended it. That's the way nature intended it. But, you know, the lion is not a very successful animal. I mean, there's very few of them. Bees, ants, and wasps are more successful because they form community, they share, they cooperate. So if you take all this word magic and mythos and everything, and you shift people's, the whole culture's attention towards models that reinforce positive things like community, and cooperation, and abundance, you know, then we just have to take control. We have to understand what's being done and how it's being done and why, and, you know, you just use those same toolkits. It's in all of us. You know, we all, right, nothing special other than just knowledge and awareness of it, that, you know, I don't know if you can run out and start doing graffiti art and all of a sudden become famous, but, I mean, maybe, you know, if you use sacred geometry, I guess so. If anybody's got to go to class or something, I mean, I totally understand if you just walk, like, behind the camera. Yeah, Julie?
Well, I understand we have some business students here.
Yeah.
I'd just like to know if any of you, before coming in here and this talk, had any idea that, you know, maybe you're being manipulated by advertising, or is there something you didn't think about, or you're...
Business students? Yeah, was there any, I mean, is there business students in here? Several? Oh, most of you, okay. If it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. Right? That's the bottom line. Here's your degree. No. Yeah, do they talk in business? I mean, is it all accounting, or is there any talk about marketing, advertising, or how, you know, a little bit? Do they talk about the mechanics of it, or just that it should be a certain amount of your operating budget? What are they? She was curious she's probably curious what the university is saying from academia about these topics. If they're addressed, not addressed, kept esoteric, kept undercover. Yeah. Well, you know, I guess, you know, the real commodity, like China, you know, they have a crisis because they don't have any innovation. They have no ideas, you know, because they just operate within this business model of efficiency. And, you know, they're looking at trying to figure out how they can free up people's minds so that they can have ideas. They're figuring out that freedom and ideas is the real commodity. You know, Apple is a perfect example. The most successful corporation in the world right now, Apple. It's an idea, you know. It's you know, talk about using symbolism. I mean, the apple with a bite out of it is the original symbolic striving for knowledge in the garden. When, you know, you took that apple, took a bite of the tree of knowledge, you know, that's what they're offering. I don't know if that makes them Satan in that story, but you know, that's their symbol. That's how that stuff resonates and works.
Well, right here on the campus, up until about 5 years ago, this used to be SIUE Edwardsville.
Yeah.
Now it's SIUE Little E.
Little E.
And that was a big marketing campaign.
Right. Wonder what that says, that Edwardsville is little and not important? Yeah, it shouldn't. Yeah. It's the red, it's the little red cherry or apple. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. You know, Buckminster Fuller, he's a guy to look at, I think, if you want to, you know, look at people worth honoring their legacy. I mean, he was one. And the fact that this building, you know, the sustainability crisis is probably the most important global topic right now, whether you look at it or not. And Buckminster Fuller was the father of sustainability, so you know he was the foremost authority on the most important topic. This building is the most important building that he created. This is his cathedral to the planet. So you have the most important topic by the most important man, most important creation, right here on your campus, on the 90th longitudinal meridian that encircles the entire globe. I mean, you know, spread the word about this. That's what the whole point of all this is, to bring attention to Bucky, this building, and his legacy. So, preach. All right. Thanks, guys.